The crack case in the mirror. Emma Bennett stood in front of the full-length mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the sleeves of her worn-out sweater. The reflection staring back at her was unfamiliar. A woman with tired eyes, paint-smudged fingers, and a posture that had long since surrendered to exhaustion. From the hallway, the sound of hurried footsteps grew louder. Jacob Bennett entered the room without knocking, his cologne filling the air. Sharp, expensive, unfamiliar. He was already dressed in his tailored navy suit, checking his phone with an impatient frown. Emma turned to face him. "You're home late," she said, forcing herself to sound neutral. Jacob barely looked up. Client dinner ran long. Her lips pressed together. Client dinner. That was the same excuse he'd given 2 nights ago. And the week before that. And the one before. Their 2 children, Lily and Max, sat at the breakfast table, stirring their cereal without eating. At 8 and 6, they had already learned to read the unspoken tension between their parents. "Mommy, can I have a waffle instead?" Max asked hesitantly. Emma started toward the stove, but Jacob cut in, his voice sharp. "No waffles. We're running late. Let's go." Max flinched, quickly lowering his spoon. Emma turned back to Jacob. "You could have said that more kindly." Jacob finally looked at her, really looked at her. His gaze traveled from her frizzy brown hair, hastily pulled into a bun, to the paint-stained jeans she wore every day. His lip curled slightly. "I can't believe you're wearing that." Emma's hands froze on the coffee pot. "Excuse me. You look like you don't even care anymore." He gestured at her clothes with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Is it so hard to put in a little effort? To look presentable? I have a reputation to maintain, Emma." Her breath caught in her throat. The words shouldn't have hurt. She had endured so many just like them. But they still did. "I was painting," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You know, in the studio I used to have before you turned it into your home office." Jacob rolled his eyes. "It was a spare room collecting dust." "It was my creative space," she corrected, but he was already smoothing down his tie, adjusting his cufflinks in the kitchen window reflection. "Emma, I haven't seen you sell a painting in years. It's time to be practical." Her fingers tightened around the coffee pot. "I gave up my career to support yours. To raise our children. I thought that's what we both wanted." Jacob sighed, exasperated. "What I want is a wife who looks like she belongs next to a senior advertising executive. The company is growing. Emma, I'm up for partner. Image matters." Lily, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. "Mommy's paintings are pretty," she said timidly. Jacob shot her a look. Lily shrank back into her seat. Emma's hands trembled as she poured his coffee into his usual travel mug. "And I don't fit that image anymore, do I?" Jacob checked his phone, completely ignoring her question. "I have a meeting with the Riverside account today. Don't wait up." Emma clenched her jaw. She had heard that excuse too many times, and as he leaned in to grab his briefcase, she caught a whiff of something. An unfamiliar perfume, something floral and expensive. Definitely not hers. "Daddy, are you coming to my recital tonight?" Max asked hopefully. Jacob barely spared him a glance. "Sorry, buddy. Big presentation tomorrow. Next time." Emma watched as Max's face crumpled, disappointment settling deep into his small features. Jacob ruffled his son's hair in a half-hearted attempt at affection before walking out the door without so much as a goodbye kiss. Emma waited until she heard his car pull out of the driveway before she let out a long breath. The silence left behind felt heavier than his presence. She turned to her kids, forcing a smile. "Okay, troops. Time for school. Who wants to help me pack lunches?" Later that morning, after dropping the kids off, Emma found herself standing in front of her bedroom mirror once again. Her brown hair was unkempt, smudges of blue paint streaked her cheek, and her sweater sagged off one shoulder. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jacob. "Working late. Don't hold dinner." Her eyes drifted to the framed wedding photo on the bedside table. A younger Jacob stood beside her, smiling, his arms wrapped tightly around her waist. Back then, he had looked at her with love, with pride. Now, he barely looked at her at all. The perfume scent from his jacket lingered in her memory. She wasn't stupid. She had seen the signs. The late nights, the business trips, the sudden change in Cologne. She had ignored them all. Until now. Something inside her cracked. Her hands moved on their own, reaching into the back of the closet. Pushing aside Jacob's expensive suits, she pulled out a small wooden box buried beneath layers of forgotten sweaters. Inside, her old charcoal pencils and sketchbook lay untouched, waiting. Her fingers trembled as she opened the book to a blank page. It was time to wake up. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor of the garage, surrounded by old paintings she had pulled from storage. Memories flooded back with each canvas. Her first gallery showing, the critics' praise, the thrill of creation. Lily wandered in, curiosity shining in her young eyes. "Mommy, what are these?" "Mine old work, sweetheart," Emma said, brushing dust off a vibrant abstract piece. "From before you were born. They're so colorful." Max ran his fingers along the textured surface. "Why did you stop?" Emma swallowed. She thought back to the day she had packed away her supplies, the day she found out she was pregnant with Lily, the day Jacob told her, "You can always go back to painting later. Right now, we need to focus on my career." "Sometimes we make choices," she answered carefully, "because we think they're the right ones at the time." Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Clara. Emma hesitated before answering. "Hey." "Emma Bennett, you've been avoiding me." Clara's voice was as sharp as ever. "I saw your name on an old gallery invite the other day, and I realized I haven't seen your work in years. What are you up to?" Emma glanced at her kids, then at the scattered paintings. "Oh, busy with the kids. Still letting that talent go to waste." Clara's tone held a challenge. The Emma I knew would have had 3 solo shows by now. Emma bit her lip. That Emma didn't have a family to take care of. "And how's Jacob? Still working those crazy hours?" Emma hesitated. "He's busy. The firm is growing." Clara said, unconvinced. "Listen, I'm doing makeup for a charity gala next week. Come by the salon. We can catch up." "I don't know, Clara." "Come on, Em. When's the last time you did something for yourself?" Emma opened her mouth to argue, but then she heard the front door. Jacob's key. Hours earlier than usual. Her grip tightened on the phone. "I'll call you back." Jacob walked straight past her, heading for their bedroom. Emma followed, finding him pulling clothes from his closet. "What are you doing home?" she asked. "Getting my tux." He held up a garment bag. "The Morrison Foundation Gala is next week. Black tie." "I didn't know about any gala." "Because you're not going," Jacob said, already checking his watch. "It's a crucial networking event. I need to focus." Something in Emma's chest tightened. As he walked out the door, she caught that floral scent again. Her phone buzzed. "Clara." Emma stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back, "What time next week?" For the first time in years, she felt ready to take a step forward. She just didn't know what it would cost her. A woman reborn. The morning after Jacob left for work, Emma stood in the middle of the garage, her makeshift studio, staring at the scattered paintings from a life she had abandoned. Bold reds, deep blues, chaotic brushstrokes that had once spoken of passion and purpose. Now, they were relics of a past self she had almost forgotten. A cool breeze drifted in from the half-open garage door. It smelled like change. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. "Clara." Emma hesitated. Last night, she had made a promise, to herself more than to Clara, but now, in the harsh light of morning, it felt distant, fragile. She answered on the third ring. "Good girl," Clara said without preamble. "You're coming, aren't you?" Emma sighed, glancing down at the paint on her hands. I said I would. And what's with the hesitation? I don't know if I'm ready. You were ready the moment he told you you weren't invited. Clara's voice was sharp, but not unkind. Emma, when was the last time you looked in the mirror and saw yourself? Not someone's wife, not someone's mother, just Emma. Emma opened her mouth to respond but found that she had no answer. Clara sighed. Get dressed. Be at the salon by noon. And for the love of God, don't wear one of those baggy sweaters. Emma couldn't help but smile. Fine. She hung up and turned back to her paintings. No more hesitation. A Gila MPC of who she was. The salon was in Midtown, a sleek, modern place filled with women who radiated the kind of effortless confidence Emma used to have. Clara greeted her at the door, hands on her hips. Finally. Emma tugged at the hem of her simple button-up blouse, suddenly feeling out of place. I don't know what I'm doing here. You're remembering. Clara took her arm and led her to a chair. And you're overdue for a makeover. Emma eyed her reflection in the salon mirror. Her face looked tired. Lines she hadn't noticed before traced the corners of her mouth, and her hair had lost its shine. Let's fix this, Clara declared. Emma let out a breath. Fine, but no crazy colors. No promises, Clara smirked. For the next hour, Emma sat still as Clara and her team worked their magic, trimming, layering, reviving the natural depth of her brown hair with warm caramel highlights. When they were done, Clara spun the chair around. Emma stared at the woman in the mirror. She looked alive. Her eyes, no longer dulled by exhaustion, shone with something she hadn't seen in years. Hope. You were never the problem. Clara murmured behind her. You just forgot how to see yourself. Emma swallowed past the lump in her throat. Thank you. Clara grinned. Oh, we're not done. Time for the real challenge. Clothes. Emma groaned. Do I have to? Yes. Consider it an intervention. Fitting into her own skin. An hour later, Emma stood in front of a fitting room mirror in a boutique Clara had dragged her into. The dress she was wearing was nothing like the clothes she used to pick for herself. Sleek, fitted in all the right places, deep emerald green. It made her feel powerful. Hot Dan. Clara whistled from behind her. Emma turned, a laugh escaping her lips. It's too much, isn't it? It's not enough, Clara corrected. But it's a damn good start. Emma studied herself in the mirror again. The dress hugged her curves, accentuating rather than hiding. It was elegant. It was bold. It was her. Clara crossed her arms. Now imagine Jacob's face when he sees you in this. Emma's amusement dimmed. She thought of Jacob, the way he had dismissed her, the way he had forgotten her. He had convinced himself she was invisible. Let him see what he threw away. She squared her shoulders. I'll take it. The first step. That night, after putting the kids to bed, Emma stood in her garage, staring at a blank canvas. For years, she had silenced the voice inside her, the one that had once burned with ideas, color, and untamed emotion. She lifted a brush. Her hand trembled at first, then steadied. The first stroke of color was tentative, then bolder. Deep crimson, like the first spark of a fire. Then black, raw, and unapologetic. She painted without thinking. She painted without fear. Hours passed. She lost herself in the motion, in the way the paint bowled into the canvas, taking shape. When she finally stepped back, she felt it. The fire was back. She wiped her hands, glancing at her phone. A text from Jacob. Working late. Don't wait up. Emma laughed softly to herself. She hadn't been waiting for a long time. Craigie Case in his perfect image. Jacob straightened his tie in his office mirror, but something felt off. He had spent the last few weeks cultivating the perfect image, showing Olivia how much potential he had, proving to his firm that he was more than just another executive. He was partner material. But lately, things weren't adding up. The way Mr. Caldwell had started watching him a little too closely. The way whispers had begun spreading in the office. And then there was Emma. She had been different lately. Less passive. Less predictable. And that bothered him. His phone buzzed. "Olivia. Gala's in a few days. I can't wait to make it official. You're finally making the right choice." He hesitated before responding. For the first time, something about this felt wrong. The CC who will play. Emma arrived at Lily's school play early, finding a seat in the front row. She was wearing a simple but elegant dress, her hair falling in soft waves. The other parents whispered, "Is that Emma Bennett? She looks different." Emma ignored them, focusing on the stage. Max and Lily's faces lit up when they spotted her in the audience. Her phone buzzed. "Jacob. Sorry, can't make it. Big meeting." Emma sighed, typing back. "The kids will understand. They're used to disappointment." She didn't need him there. She never did. As the lights dimmed and the play began, Emma sat back in her chair, a quiet smile on her lips. She wasn't the same woman anymore. And soon, Jacob would realize that too. The union revealing. The morning light streamed into Emma's garage-turned studio, casting long shadows across the floor. She stood in front of her latest painting, brush poised in her hand, as the scent of fresh paint filled the air. The canvas before her was a storm, bold, unapologetic strokes of color clashing, twisting, shaping something raw and untamed. She had spent the entire night painting, losing herself in the release. For the first time in years, she wasn't just existing, she was creating again. And she felt it. The fire that Jacob had tried to smother. The voice she had silenced for too long. It was back. The DNER table lies. "Mom, why are you so happy?" Lily asked over breakfast, swinging her feet under the table. Emma smiled as she sipped her coffee, "Because I remembered how much I love painting." Lily brightened. "Can I see?" "Not yet," Emma said, "but soon." Max, quiet and observant as always, studied her. "Daddy's not gonna like it." Emma stilled. She knew he wouldn't. Jacob had built an entire world where he was the important one, the successful executive with a perfect wife who knew her place. But that world was cracking, and he had no idea. The front door swung open, and Jacob walked in. His tie was loosened, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder. He dropped his briefcase on the counter and kissed Lily's head absent-mindedly. "Late night?" Emma asked, watching him carefully. Jacob ran a hand through his hair. "Meetings. You know how it is." Emma did know. She had heard that same excuse every time. She smelled that perfume on his suit. "I saw your message about the kids' play," Jacob continued, sitting down and pouring himself coffee. "I'll make it up to them." "You always say that," Max muttered under his breath. Jacob's eyes flicked to him. "What was that?" "Nothing," Max mumbled, shoving cereal into his mouth. Emma's gaze softened at her son. Her kids were already learning what it meant to expect disappointment. Jacob turned to Emma. "Anyway, I have a huge event coming up next week, the Morrison Gala. It's going to be a big night for me." Emma arched a brow. "Big night." Jacob smirked, swirling his coffee. "Yeah, I'm making some big career moves. The kind that require the right people by my side. The right people." She knew exactly what that meant. Emma leaned back in her chair, tilting her head. "And am I one of those people?" Jacob hesitated, just for a second. But it was enough. "Emma, these things aren't your scene. You don't really fit in." There it was, the confirmation of what she already knew. Jacob didn't want her there. Because she wasn't his image anymore. Emma smiled. "You're right, Jacob. Maybe I don't fit in." She let the words hang, savoring the way his brows furrowed slightly, as if something in her tone unsettled him. Then she stood and kissed Lily's forehead. Let's get ready for school." Jacob watched her as she walked away, something unreadable in his expression. She could almost feel his discomfort, and she enjoyed it. The storm gay theaters. The moment Jacob left for work, Emma picked up her phone and dialed Clara. "You were right," she said the second Clara answered. Clara hummed knowingly. "Of course I was. What part specifically?" Emma grinned. "The part where I stop waiting for Jacob's approval and start living for myself. About damn time," Clara muttered. "Now, are you ready for the next step?" Emma glanced at the Morrison Gala invitation Jacob had carelessly left on the kitchen counter. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." JCOG's purificat native falls apart. Jacob straightened his tie in the mirror of his office, feeling unstoppable. Tonight was the night. The night everything would fall into place. Olivia had whispered in his ear over dinner last week about solidifying their future, an obvious hint at their relationship becoming public. And Jacob had played along, imagining a life where he was admired, envied, a man who had traded up. He had earned this new life. Emma would be fine. She had always been fine. As he adjusted his cufflinks, his phone buzzed. A message from Olivia. "Can't wait for tonight. We'll make it unforgettable." Jacob smirked. Yes, tonight would be perfect. A chauve-seeking arrival. The Morrison Gala was a spectacle. Floor-length gowns, expensive champagne, New York's elite mingling under crystal chandeliers. Jacob arrived alone, just as planned, nodding at associates, shaking hands. Olivia was already inside, waiting for the right moment to make their grand entrance as a power couple. But something was off. The air in the room shifted. Whispers spread like wildfire, heads turning toward the entrance. Jacob followed their gazes, and his breath caught Emma, standing in the doorway. Not in paint-stained jeans, not in an oversized sweater. No, she was in a stunning emerald green gown, her hair cascading in elegant waves, her presence commanding the entire room. For a full 3 seconds, Jacob didn't recognize her. Then his stomach dropped, because everyone was looking at her. Even Mr. Caldwell. Jacob felt something tighten in his chest. He had planned his entrance, his moment. But Emma had stolen the spotlight without even trying. And that's when he knew. He had made a mistake. A very big mistake. The QOLAPC of a lie. Jacob moved toward Emma. But before he could reach her, "Ladies and gentlemen, a special announcement." The voice cut through the ballroom. It was Mr. Caldwell. Jacob froze. The older man stepped onto the small stage, his eyes locked on Emma. "I'm thrilled to introduce the Morrison Foundation's newest creative director, Emma Bennett." The room erupted in applause. Jacob staggered. Olivia's hand clamped around his wrist. What the hell is happening? Jacob had no answer. Emma, his wife, smiled graciously at Mr. Caldwell as she took the stage, her posture poised, her confidence effortless. She wasn't just here. She was taking the future he thought belonged to him. And she knew it. When her gaze met his across the room, there was no anger, no sadness, just certainty. And that's when Jacob realized. Emma wasn't asking for his attention anymore. She was commanding it, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The power chef. The moment the words left Mr. Caldwell's mouth, the entire ballroom shifted. Eyes widened. Whispers grew. Heads turned. And at the center of it all, Emma. She stood radiant on the stage, her emerald dress catching the golden glow of the chandeliers. She wasn't just present. She was commanding the room. Jacob felt like the ground had just been ripped out from beneath him. Emma, creative director. His wife. How? His jaw clenched as he watched Mr. Caldwell beam at her. Emma Bennett, his newest star. This wasn't how tonight was supposed to go. He was supposed to be the one making the headlines. He was supposed to be the center of attention, announcing his own future with Olivia. But now it was Emma. and she was thriving. The moment he lost her, Jacob finally found his voice, forcing his way through the stunned crowd toward the stage. "Emma," he breathed when he reached her, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "What the hell is this?" She turned to face him, her green eyes sharp, unwavering, unapologetic. "My future," she said simply. The words cut through him. Her future, not theirs. For the first time in their entire marriage, Emma wasn't looking at him for approval. She wasn't waiting for him to acknowledge her, to allow her to exist beside him. She had stepped ahead of him, and she didn't need him anymore. Before he could say another word, Mr. Caldwell clapped him on the shoulder. "Jacob, I had no idea your wife was such a talent, and to think you kept her hidden all these years." The words were casual, but the sting was deliberate. Jacob swallowed, forcing a tight smile. She's always been creative." Mr. Caldwell chuckled, taking Emma's hand and turning back to the crowd. "Emma, my dear, tell us, what's your vision for the Morrison project?" Emma smiled, completely at ease. She didn't stumble, didn't shrink back. She spoke, clear, confident, unshaken. And as she did, the crowd listened. Not just politely, not just out of courtesy. They listened because they were drawn to her. Jacob stood frozen as his boss, his colleagues, his potential investors all gave Emma the one thing he had never given her: respect. And in that moment, as applause filled the air, Jacob finally realized what he had done. He had lost her. The beginning of the end. The rest of the evening was a blur. Jacob found himself at the bar, whiskey in hand, watching as Emma floated through the ballroom, effortlessly charming every important guest, watching as men leaned in to listen to her ideas, as women complimented her boldness, watching as she became someone he no longer had control over. And then there was Olivia. She stormed up to him, her red dress clinging tightly to her body, her lips twisted in frustration. "What the hell was that?" she hissed. Jacob rubbed his temple. "I don't know." "You don't know?" Olivia's voice rose slightly, drawing a few curious glances. "That was supposed to be our night, Jacob. We were supposed to announce your promotion, everything we've been working toward." Jacob gritted his teeth. "Maybe you should lower your voice. I don't care who hears me." Olivia snapped. "I didn't climb my way up through this company to be outshined by your washed-up, stay-at-home wife." Jacob flinched, because the entire room had just witnessed that washed-up wife outshine them both. He looked at Olivia, really looked at her, and for the first time she felt cheap. Not in the way she dressed, not in the way she carried herself, but in the way she had manipulated him. She had used him, and he had been too blind to see it. Jacob sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe we should take a step back." Olivia froze. "What?" He shook his head. "Tonight didn't go as planned. Maybe we should slow down." She laughed, cold and sharp. "Oh, Jacob, you really are pathetic." His brows furrowed. "Excuse me? You think this is about some relationship?" Olivia scoffed, stepping closer, her voice dripping with venom. "Jacob, I don't care about you. I care about what you can give me." Jacob's stomach sank. She smirked. "And right now, you're not worth anything." Then she turned, striding toward the exit, leaving him standing alone at the bar. For the first time in his entire career, Jacob Bennett had no one on his side. The final straw. Jacob arrived home hours later, his mind spinning. The gala had been a disaster. Emma had humiliated him. Olivia had abandoned him. And now he needed answers. The house was quiet when he walked in. Too quiet. "Emma," he called out. No response. His brows furrowed as he walked into the kitchen. The wine glass she usually drank from was gone. Something felt wrong. Then he saw it. The closet, half empty. His heart stopped. He rushed upstairs, pushing open the bedroom door. And there, on his side of the bed, was a letter. Jacob picked it up, his hands trembling. And as he read it, the truth finally settled in. Emma was gone. She had taken the kids, taken her art, taken her life back, and she wasn't coming back. The last Guo. Emma stood in the doorway of her new apartment, watching as Lily and Max unpacked their things. They were laughing. For the first time in months, they looked free. She turned as Clara set down another box. "You okay?" Emma exhaled. "Yeah." Her phone buzzed. A message from Jacob. "Come home. Let's fix this." Emma stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she typed 2 words. "We're home." And for the first time in years, she truly was. The fall of Jacob Benit. Jacob's hands shook as he gripped the letter. He read it once, then again. Each word sliced through him, sharp as a blade. "Jacob, I've spent years waiting for you to see me. I've spent years making excuses for the way you dismissed me, the way you forgot me, the way you made me feel small. But I'm done waiting. I'm done shrinking myself so you can shine. I'm done pretending we have a marriage when all we've had for years is distance. I've taken the kids. I've taken my life back. I'm not coming home. Emma." Jacob stumbled back, his knees weak. The air in the house felt wrong, like a body missing its soul. He rushed to the closets, half empty, to the kids' rooms. Beds made, drawers cleared out. To the kitchen. No more little lunchboxes on the counter. No more tiny shoes by the door. His entire family was gone. And he never even saw it coming. The KL he Navy or XPCT'd. Jacob's mind spiraled as he collapsed onto the couch. Emma couldn't be gone. She wouldn't leave him. Not really. He grabbed his phone, scrolling through their texts, searching for anything. Some clue that this was just some misunderstanding. He found nothing. Then his phone rang. His breath hitched. Emma. For a brief, fleeting second, hope flickered in his chest. Maybe she was coming home. Maybe she realized she was overreacting. Maybe she... Mr. Bennet. Jacob's stomach dropped. It wasn't Emma. It was his boss. Mr. Caldwell's voice was clipped, cold, professional. "Sir," Jacob said quickly, sitting up straighter. "I was going to call you first thing in the morning." "That won't be necessary," Caldwell interrupted. Jacob's pulse quickened. Something was wrong. "I need you to come into the office tomorrow morning," Caldwell continued. "We have some discussions to finalize." Jacob's mouth went dry. Discussions. There was a long pause. Then, "Your future at this company, Jacob." The line went dead. Jacob slowly lowered the phone, his world tilting off its axis. His job, his reputation, everything was slipping through his fingers. And it all started with Emma. Inanez NEU life begins. Emma leaned against the counter of her new apartment, watching as Lily and Max unpacked their books in their new room. Their giggles filled the space. It was small. It wasn't perfect. But it was theirs. A fresh start. Her phone buzzed. A message from Clara. "Proud of you. Let me know when you're ready to celebrate." Emma smiled, typing back. "Soon." Then her phone buzzed again. Jacob. She let it ring. She didn't need to read his messages, because she already knew what he wanted. He wanted her to come back, to undo the damage, to fix what had been broken. But Emma wasn't his fixer anymore. She was her own person. And this time, she wasn't going back. Jacob Benit, the FALENEXECU. Jacob sat in his office the next morning, staring blankly at the termination papers on his desk. Across from him, Mr. Caldwell's expression was unreadable. "Consider this a mercy," the older man said. Jacob's mouth went dry. "Sir, please, this is a mistake. I've been nothing but loyal." "Exactly," Caldwell cut in. "Loyal to the wrong things. Your work has suffered. Your reputation is tarnished, and you let someone like Olivia Monroe manipulate you." Jacob's fingers curled into fists. "I can fix this," he said through gritted teeth. Caldwell sighed, leaning back in his chair. "No, Jacob, you can't." The finality in his voice crushed him. Caldwell gestured to the papers. "Sign them. Leave quietly. And maybe, just maybe, you'll have a chance to rebuild somewhere else." Jacob's world blurred as he picked up the pen. With one stroke, he signed away the career he had sacrificed everything for, including Emma, including his family. And when he walked out of that office for the last time, no one looked up. The last MESSAG. That evening, Jacob sat alone in his empty house, staring at the blinking cursor on his phone. He had typed and deleted the message 100 times. Finally, he sent it. "I know I don't deserve it, but can we talk?" He waited. An hour passed. Then 2. Then 3. And then, finally, Emma's reply came through. 2 words. "Not anymore." Jacob's heart sank. The truth hit him all at once. He had lost everything. And for the first time, he had no one to blame but himself. The rise of MMA Benedict. Emma stood in front of the massive glass windows of the Morrison Foundation's office, watching the city pulse with life beneath her. Her office. It still didn't feel real. 1 month ago, she was invisible, a forgotten woman in the background of Jacob's life. Now she was leading one of the biggest artistic projects in New York. Now she was finally living for herself. Her phone buzzed. A message from Clara. "Don't forget, you're meeting with the gallery director today. This is your chance. M." Emma smiled, typing back. "I won't waste it." Because for the first time in years, she was choosing herself. The KLJ and EVR saw coming. Jacob sat on the couch in his empty house, staring at the floor. Bills piled up on the counter. His savings account was dwindling, and his phone hadn't rung in days. No calls from Caldwell. No calls from Olivia. No calls from Emma. He had gone from being an executive on the rise to a man who no longer mattered. Then, his phone buzzed. A rush of hope flooded through him as he grabbed it. "Emma." He exhaled sharply, his fingers trembling as he answered. "Emma," he said quickly. "Thank you for calling. I wanted to talk. To explain." Her voice was calm. "I'm not calling to talk, Jacob." The hope in his chest froze. "I just need to know what your plans are for the kids," Emma continued. "Your next scheduled weekend is coming up." Jacob swallowed. I was hoping we could discuss us." A long pause. Then Emma said the words that shattered him completely. "There is no us, Jacob." The silence was deafening. Jacob ran a hand over his face, his throat tightening. I made mistakes. I know that, but I can fix them." Emma cut him off. "You didn't just make mistakes," she said softly. "You made a choice." A lump formed in Jacob's throat. "You chose to ignore me. You chose to belittle my art. You chose to make me feel like I wasn't enough. And when that wasn't enough for you, you chose Olivia." Jacob opened his mouth, but there was nothing to say, because she was right. And they both knew it. Her voice softened slightly. "Max and Lily will always need you in their lives, but I don't." And with that, the line went dead. Jacob sat in the silence of his empty house, gripping his phone like it was the only thing keeping him from falling apart completely. Because for the first time in his life, he had no one left to blame but himself. The artist RETURNs. Emma stood in front of the gallery doors, nerves twisting in her stomach. This was it, her first art showing in over a decade. The same world she had walked away from was now welcoming her back. Clara nudged her. "Breathe, Em. This is your night." Emma exhaled, stepping inside. People were already murmuring in awe as they admired her pieces. Large, bold canvases filled the space. Storms colliding. a phoenix rising from the ashes, a woman stepping out of the shadows. Each painting told a story. Her story. "Ms. Bennett," a voice said behind her. She turned to find a gallery director approaching. "Your work is stunning," he said. "We'd love to feature you in a solo exhibition next season." Emma's heart leaped. A solo exhibition. Her own name on the gallery walls. Her own work standing on its own, without anyone's permission. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I'd love that." Applause broke out in the room as the gallery owner announced her return. Emma stood there, soaking in the moment. This wasn't just a comeback. This was her rebirth. The final meeting. 1 week later, Emma sat across from Jacob in a coffee shop, sipping her tea. This was the first time they had spoken in person since she walked away. Jacob looked different, tired, defeated. For the first time since she had known him, he no longer carried himself like a man who had it all. He had lost everything. And yet, Emma felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. "I want to be in the kids' lives," Jacob said finally, his voice quiet. Emma nodded. "I never wanted to take them from you." He swallowed hard. "And us." Emma set her cup down, meeting his eyes. "There is no us, Jacob." The words were final. Jacob flinched, looking away. "I didn't think you'd really leave," he admitted. "I thought. You thought I'd always stay." Emma finished for him. Jacob nodded. Emma studied him for a long moment. "You never saw me, Jacob," she said softly. "Not really. But I see myself now, and that's enough." Jacob exhaled, nodding slowly. For the first time, he didn't argue, because he finally understood. Emma stood, grabbing her bag. "I'll send the revised custody schedule tonight." She turned to leave. But before she walked out, she glanced over her shoulder. "Goodbye, Jacob." Then she walked away, and she never looked back. The woman, she was always me in to be. 1 year later, Emma stood in the middle of her solo art exhibit, surrounded by hundreds of guests. They whispered her name in admiration. They pointed at her paintings, each one telling a different part of her story. And at the center of it all, Emma. She wasn't just someone's wife anymore. She wasn't just a woman waiting to be noticed. She was an artist. She was her own person, and she was finally, truly free. As she lifted her glass in a toast with Clara, her eyes shining with joy, she knew one thing for certain. She had won. And Jacob had to live with the fact that he had lost the best thing that ever happened to him. The end. Emma's journey is complete. She didn't just leave Jacob. She rose above him. She found herself. She reclaimed her power. She built a life that was hers alone. And Jacob, he was left with nothing but regret. This was never just a story about a woman leaving her husband. This was a story about a woman who stopped waiting for permission to be great. And that's what made her truly unstoppable. The LEJCW of MMA Bennett. 1 year later, the morning sun streamed through the glass walls of Emma's penthouse studio, casting golden light over the large, vibrant canvases spread across the space. The air smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Emma stood in the center of it all, wearing a simple black jumpsuit, a brush in one hand, a cup of coffee in the other. She turned to the latest piece on her easel, a woman walking away from the ruins of her past, stepping into the light. It was her most personal painting yet, a symbol of her journey, a reminder of everything she had left behind, and a celebration of everything she had gained. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She wiped her hands on a rag before picking it up. A message from Clara. "Your big day is here, ready to make history." Emma smiled, because today wasn't just another gallery showing. Today was the official launch of the Bennett Foundation, her own art foundation designed to support young, struggling artists, people just like she had once been. Emma set down her coffee, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself, "Let's go make history." The event of the year. The gallery was packed. Hundreds of guests filled the grand exhibition hall, murmuring in awe as they admired Emma's work. Powerful strokes, rich colors, pieces that spoke of pain, resilience, and rebirth. A journalist from the New York Times whispered to another, "Emma Bennett's comeback is the most inspiring story of the decade." "Not just a comeback," the other corrected, "a revolution." Emma stood near the entrance, watching her guests. She belonged here now. She wasn't the forgotten wife of Jacob Bennett. She was Emma Bennett, the artist, the visionary, the woman who rebuilt herself from the ashes. Clara appeared beside her, holding 2 champagne glasses. "You did it," Clara said, handing her one. Emma took a sip, her lips curving into a smile. "We did it." Before Clara could respond, a voice called out, "Mom." Emma turned just in time for Lily and Max to rush into her arms. Lily, now 9, grinned up at her. "We saw your paintings, Mommy. They're the best ones here." Max, now 7, nodded seriously. "I told people you're the best artist in the world." Emma laughed, pulling them both in close. "I love you both so much." Their giggles filled the air, blending with the distant hum of admiration from the guests. This moment was what mattered. Not the past, not regret. Only this, the final conversation. Emma was about to step onto the stage for her speech when she saw him. Jacob, standing near the entrance, dressed in a simple dark suit, looking out of place in a room full of people who no longer respected him. Their eyes met. For the first time, Emma didn't feel anything. No pain, no resentment, no longing. Just acceptance. He approached slowly, hands shoved in his pockets. "You look different." Emma arched a brow. "I am different." Jacob exhaled. "I just wanted to say congratulations. You deserve all of this." There was sincerity in his voice, but Emma knew. This wasn't for her. This was for him. An attempt to ease his own guilt. She tilted her head. "Are you happy, Jacob?" He hesitated. That was answer enough. Jacob sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I lost everything when you left." Emma's lips curled slightly. "No, Jacob, you didn't lose me. You threw me away." His throat bowed. "I know." Emma studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "I hope you figure out what you want. And I hope, someday, you don't need someone else to give you purpose." Jacob opened his mouth, then closed it, because there was nothing left to say. Emma turned away, walking toward the stage. She didn't look back. Not this time. Not ever again. The final triumph. Emma stepped up to the microphone, looking out at the hundreds of faces watching her. People who had once dismissed her. People who had once forgotten her. People who now admired her. She took a deep breath and began. 2 years ago, I was someone else. A woman who had forgotten her own worth. A woman who let herself be defined by someone else's expectations. But I learned something important. We are never trapped in the lives we think we must accept. We can rebuild. We can rise. And we can create something new, something that is entirely, beautifully, ours. Applause erupted. Emma smiled. Because she was no longer someone's wife. She was no longer a shadow in someone else's world. She was Emma Bennett, and she had won. The final scene. Later that night, back in her studio, Emma picked up her brush, dipped it into deep blue paint, and let it glide over the canvas. Not for money, not for approval, not for anyone else, just for herself, just for the love of creating. The woman who had once given up everything was now a woman who had everything she had ever needed, and she would never forget that again. As she stepped back, she whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning. The end. This final chapter seals Emma's transformation. She forgives, but never forgets. She moves forward, but never looks back. She chooses herself and wins. And Jacob? Jacob is left with nothing but regret. Because the biggest mistake of his life wasn't losing Emma. It was never valuing her when he had the chance. Emma Bennett's story isn't just about revenge or escape. It's about rebirth. And that's what makes her unstoppable.